Neighbors kept parking in our lot. I froze them out, by user Bry trick. This happened around 20 years ago. Our family owned 2 apartment buildings, 3 units each. We lived in 2 of them, rented out the other 4. There's nothing but these 3 flats lining both sides of the road for about a mile. Not all have parking. On the side streets are houses and very little street parking. We had more land than most of these units, since it was also our home. So we had parking for around 16 cars. Everything was fine for literally decades. Then cars started appearing in our parking lot that were not our tenants. I blocked one in one day. Went outside to see this a-hole drove through our bushes and across the yard to get out. I called the cops, nothing they could do. So I called a tow company and had them put up signs. We'd have to call them to have a car towed, the signs seemed to work. No more random cars. Until New Year's Eve one year. I arrive home and every space is filled. There are even cars on the street blocking in the other cars. I'm beyond pissed. I call the tow company, they can't do anything for a few hours because they are so busy. We're in the Chicago suburbs. It's below zero out. I have an idea. I dig out the lawn sprinklers and hoses. I run one hose inside to the laundry room faucet and turn on the hot water. This way the hose and sprinklers won't ice up. But the cars and ground sure did. 3 sprinklers, moved every half hour or so. For almost 5 hours. Every car, every square inch of the parking lot, the street by the cars, encased in ice. I made it a point to spray ice in the locks, between the window seals and glass. In the grills. Put away the sprinklers and hoses, went to bed. 4 a.m., furious pounding on the doors, doorbells ringing non-stop. We just smiled and called the cops. Waited until they arrived and went outside. Cops were holding back laughter. These people were told to park here by their friend who owned an apartment several buildings away. The same idiot who drove over our bushes. I pointed to the tow sign and told the people to move their cars or get towed. In our town, cops can ticket on private property with the owner's permission. So all cars were ticketed. They were also towed, since nobody could get in their vehicle. Wish we had it on video. I went from school teacher to chairman of the board of a big company for the sake of revenge, by user Echo 1771. When I was a tiny kid, my father was my best friend. He worked multiple jobs to support my family, all while powering his way through law school. He even built a couple of small businesses from the ground up with a couple of his friends. All while doing this, he managed to be the best dad ever, spending as much time as he could with my mother, myself and my baby siblings. One day, we found out that he had stage 4 stomach cancer, the kind that you don't recover from. My mother and I stayed by his side all the way till it was all over. The last memory I have of my father was when he was completely immobile, practically a vegetable at this point, with tubes going in and out of his body, and me just praying that he'd still be able to remember who I was. All the guy could do was smile at me just to let me know he still recognized his son, even if the doctors told us most of his memories would be gone. Eventually, he fell into a coma for some days before waking up to say goodbye to my mother, who was by his side when he died. She was a housewife, so we really didn't have much to go on after his death. Enter, my grandfather. He was one of those self-centered boomer types who makes everything about himself. After my father died, he'd use the newspaper obituary to boast about his dead son's grades and achievements, which I realized seemed to be the only thing my dad was to him. Just in case you were wondering, yes, we are Asian. My mother was grieving and trying to find a way to make ends meet, and my grandfather graciously offered to help her control my father's 2 businesses to help support us. My mother agreed because she didn't have any experience. While we grew up, the 2 businesses didn't provide much for us, likely because my father was one of the big reasons they were thriving. Mom was in and out of multiple jobs just to keep us floating. My grandfather offered to help put me and my siblings through school. I managed to score some scholarships with some good schools growing up, so thankfully he didn't have to do as much for me, but we were really glad that he helped out with my siblings. After I made it out of school, I found out that my family was broke and my 2 siblings were still making their way through medical school. My sister even offered to stop and just get a job, but I told her to keep going because she was doing so well and that she deserved to graduate. My grandparents had cut us off because they didn't approve of the directions my siblings took in life, especially my sister, who was, for them, too female to have a career in medicine. My grandmother is a bit of a misogynist. Why are you wasting your time and money becoming a doctor? You're just going to have children and quit. I was working as a high school teacher when I was contacted by one of my dad's old business partners for one of his companies. After I asked him about how the company was doing, he told me that my grandfather, who was still in control of my father's shares, was siphoning money from the company for himself, and he was earning way more than he was giving me and my siblings for our education. So all our lives he'd been making us feel indebted to him for money that was supposed to be ours to begin with, and he lied to us by telling us that Dad's companies weren't making any money for us at all. We also realized that when he cut us off, he was cutting us off from our own money, forcing my siblings to drop out and give up careers that they'd been working their whole lives for. What's worse is that this was our father's money, and we know that he'd wanted it to help us provide for our futures even after he died, and here comes his asshole father basically shitting on his legacy for his own enrichment. I even found out that he used his position to take possession of the company's office space and forced them to set up shop in a smaller, cheaper office while renting the original space out under his own name to the company's competitors to make money from them too, all while I had to work multiple jobs to help my mother and siblings pay the bills. Cue revenge. My grandfather's biggest weakness has always been his pride. In fact, I suspect that he wanted us to think he was helping support us out of his own pocket because he wanted everyone to think he was some kind of hero when in reality he was financially choking us. I recognized that no matter what my grandfather said, my siblings, my mother and I were legally the owners of my father's company shares. So after having a statement signed by the three of them, I approached all the board of directors sans my grandfather and let them know that I was now that sole representative of my late dad's estate. My grandfather also made himself chairman of the board. According to the company records, he did no work for the company at all, so the position was just a name that allowed him to receive money, so I convinced them that since he was only chairman as representative of my father's estate, that made me the chairman. I did not intend to keep the position because I did not have the experience for it. Then I contacted other members of my extended family about my grandfather's unethical practices with the company's office space. He was eventually pressured by them into evicting the company's main competitor from their office space. Serves them right for conniving with my grandfather to take the company's old office space. At the next board meeting, I prepared for the moment I'd been waiting my entire life for. When he entered the conference room, to preside over the meeting as the chairman, he found his chair facing away from the table with all the board members already seated at the table, and like a Bond villain, I spun the chair around to reveal to him that I'd been the one sitting there the entire meeting. I told him that the company and my family no longer needed him and that I'd be taking control over representation of my father's estate. Do you know that I'm the one who put him and his siblings through school? He said in shock. I only went no. Dad did. The look of sheer embarrassment on his face was perfect. I've never seen him look defeated my entire life until that moment, and this sort of satisfaction could not be achieved by simply ratting him out. I stepped down from the chairman position and took a job in the company's treasury department as a bookkeeper with a meager salary, but at least now any profit sharing or dividends that the company released would go where my father wanted it to go. And finally, one of the first decisions I got to make as a board member before stepping down was to give my mother a permanent job that she deserved. My grandfather is now jobless. He spends all his time at home, and because he spent his life being selfish and self-centered, he has no friends. All he had going for him was being able to power trip over other people and boasting about his assets and achievements. Even my grandmother has had it with him, and the two don't even sleep in the same room anymore. I hope he lives the rest of his short life regretting that he didn't live his life with more compassion and humility. Edit. I've gotten a lot of comments about the legality of what went on. During all this, the only lawyer working in the company was my grandfather, and we all know he did jack shit. When we hired a team of actual helpful lawyers, they told us exactly the same things you guys pointed out. They're still trying to clean everything up so we don't get into big trouble. Update. Apparently my sister saw this post and just informed me that he's kinda miserable now because his wife is angry at him because he siphoned what's left of their money to an extramarital sugar baby he had in probably another attempt at getting someone to affirm and glorify him. I guess he hasn't learned. Saved my friend's job and burned my creep of a boss, by user Mercury Project. So this is a story I have only shared a few times but always wanted to write down. It's long, so there is a TLDR at the bottom. When I was in college some 10 plus years ago, I worked for my university as a resident advisor in a dorm. It was a student job that afforded me a place to live in exchange for managing a floor in one of the student housing buildings on campus. The job itself was fairly basic and consisted of helping students with housing issues, maintaining an office hour MF, having a duty weekend once a month, and enforcing university policy. While I initially took the position for the housing, the dorm community aspect ended up being fairly enjoyable. Most of the policies of the university housing were common sense, no loud music after 9 p.m. or running in the building, etc. If someone was found breaking the rules, you would tell them to stop and document it in case the issue became a habitual. There were some rule infractions that also came with fines, such as smoking inside or damaging physical property. One of the policies that had a fine attached was getting locked out of your dorm. If you needed to be let back into your dorm, the university would fine you $25, and if you actually lost your key, then you would be charged $500 to recore the door lock. The first year I was an RA, I never charged a student to get back into their dorm. I thought it was a bad policy, as being a poor student myself, I understood what $25 could mean to someone. The building's resident manager, my boss, at that time was about to graduate and didn't care if we charged them to get into their room, and so everything was good. However, in year 2 I have my first meeting with the other RAs and our new RM, we will call him Doug. Doug was one of those people who was immediately overly friendly, and because he was a friend felt like he could come into your personal space. Stuff like touching your shoulders or arms while talking to you. It was in this first meeting that he assigned out all of the master keys for the building. He had 2 keys for each floor, which were inside a zipper binder along with a key log consisting of the key's serial number and RA it was assigned to. This will become important later. He gave us each one of the keys and then placed the second on a duty set of keys, which were checked out on the weekend by the pair of RAs on duty. While the university policies for a student losing a key were bad, the policies for an RA losing a master key are worse. If you were to lose a master key, you would be terminated, thus losing your housing, and you would be fined the cost to recore each door on your floor, $12,000. While we all already knew this, I recall how much time Doug specifically spent reiterating this fact to us in this first meeting, and how he was no longer responsible for the keys since we now had them. Several weeks into the semester, I am conducting duty rounds in the building with another RA whom I am friends with. We will call her Brittany. Brittany is very smart, assertive, and always a laugh, so I loved working duty with her. This day, however, Brittany seems a bit down. After a bit of prodding, she confides in me that Doug has been making her uncomfortable and that he kept touching her. I believed I understood what she meant, because I also disliked how touchy he was and how close he would get to me when we spoke. That's not what she meant. I talked to her about reporting him, but she did not want to, presumably since Doug was one of the department's golden boys. Brittany said she had had enough, so she told him off and didn't think it would happen again, but asked me to stick around her anytime he was around. After learning what Brittany told me, I asked another female RA who I was friends with what she thought of Doug. While she didn't claim he had done anything to her, she did express that she didn't like being alone with him. I decided he was a creep, and I became very brief anytime I had to speak with him. I also made sure I would stick around after staff meetings until everyone left, and would linger in the office doorway if Doug called one of the girls back. The year goes on and I continue doing my job just as I had the year before. I document major and minor incidents, but I don't ever document letting students back into their dorms. One weekend I am on duty and get a notification on the duty pager, a pager, from a student. I call them and they are locked out on another floor. I grab the duty set keys and head to let them back into their dorm. In the hallway I run into Doug, who asks what I am doing. We have a brief exchange. I tell him I am letting a student into their room, and I continue about my way thinking nothing of it. The following Monday I am called into the office. I am asked about the student I let into his room and how often I have to let people in. I am honest and tell him that I never charge the students and I do it several times a month. Apparently, because the students are informed of the policy and their responsibilities when they accept the keys, he considers my failure to charge them to be theft from the university. He had apparently reviewed all of the reports submitted under my user ID and seen that I had never charged anyone for being let back into their dorm, and told me that he was referring me for disciplinary action. The disciplinary action did not go far, or at least no one higher up ever spoke to me about that situation. For me though, this drew a line that only served to reinforce my opinion of him. School continues much as it had. A few months before the end of the year I am again doing duty rounds with Brittany, who is clearly upset. Apparently, a few nights prior she had a late night and a few drinks with friends. Early the next morning a student had awoken her from her drunken stupor because they had locked themselves out of their dorm. Still half asleep, she grabbed her master key and let the student in. When she returned to her room, instead of putting the key up, she had instead set it on her counter, where it then fell into the trash. Awake the next day and not realizing what had happened, she took her trash to the dumpster and it was gone to the dump before she remembered what happened. Brittany couldn't afford to lose her job, housing, and being fined $12,000. She was at a complete loss as what to do. After considering the consequences of reporting what had happened and deciding that was a bad course of action, we brainstorm and decide that we need to find a way make a new key without anyone knowing. We didn't have long to act either, as each day ran the risk of a random key check by Doug. The university keys are made on a key blank that are not readily available at the local shops, presumably for this exact reason. So we scoured the internet looking for a copy and ended up finding one that looked like a match. However, the website's picture was just a silhouette of what the key's outline looked like, so we weren't 100% sure. It was our best option, so we ordered it. A plan was born. With our key blank en route, we decided that we would take the second master key on the duty set midweek, when it's not being used, and take it somewhere to make a copy. The next problem was, once we had a working copy of the key, we would still need to find a way to get the key's serial number back on the copy. Luckily, Brittany knew someone with hammer stamps we could use to imprint the numbers on the key, and I somehow remembered the binder that Doug had with the serial numbers. Because Doug's office was across the hall from his room, he could always hear if anyone was in there. Since Brittany had bad experiences with Doug, we didn't want him to find her in there alone, so it fell to me. I waited till night on one of my duty weekends and got into the office. I opened the door as quietly as I could and snuck in, leaving the door only slightly ajar so that no one in the hall could immediately see in. I was only halfway through looking for the binder when I heard his door open. Sure enough, Doug steps in and asks what I am doing. I know my heart was racing, but I had come up with what I thought was a believable lie. I told him I had to use the university computer in his office to file an incident report because my laptop wasn't working. The lie was good enough and he bought it, leaving me alone to continue my search. It only took a few minutes before I found the binder and got the key number assigned to Brittany. I went ahead and filed a bogus report on a minor infraction in case Doug checked and was out of there. Each day we waited to see if the key blank would arrive. The plan hinged on this key, and it was exhilarating feeling the plan beginning to come together. When it finally came, it was a perfect match, except for the large key brand stamped across it. There wasn't a way to cover it up, and it was too noticeable to pass as a real key. The whole plan seemed to fall apart. We decided we would still make a copy on this branded blank so that if Brittany needed to use the key, she could do so without being discovered not having her master key. Brittany waited till midweek and took the second master key off of the duty set to use to make a copy. Once she had it, we talked over the plan and joked about how nice it would be if we could just change the numbers on the second key to match the serial number of the first. While that seemed like it probably wouldn't work, we decided to look at how many numbers would have to be changed. It was 0. In our first meeting where Doug had assigned us keys, where he stressed how we would be fired if we lost these keys, he had accidentally issued Brittany his copy. We realized we didn't have to do anything else, and Brittany put her master key in her lockbox. After 2 weeks, no one had noticed that the duty set was missing a key. Because we were tired of waiting, we had a student pretend to get locked out while Brittany was in town. The responding RA didn't have a clue and was confused why none of the keys worked, and they called up Doug. Doug couldn't seem to get any of the keys to work either, and so he called Brittany back to the dorm, so that he could use her master key. A task in which she was happy to assist. When everyone realized a master key was missing, the big bosses got involved. There was a complete building search, a search of dorm rooms and multiple interviews of each RA. None of the RAs knew anything but Brittany and I, so we feigned ignorance along with everyone else. I believe they suspected Brittany initially, but when she was able to produce her correct master key, their demeanor with her drastically changed. The floor got recorded as you would expect. They never did figure out where that key had gone and thus couldn't justifiably charge anyone for the incident. We had a meeting where they basically chewed all of us out about keys and the importance of their security. While the meeting was for us all, a heavy emphasis was clearly directed towards Doug. Apparently, as part of his position, he was required to complete a key log each day to make sure that the keys on the duty set were accounted for. Unfortunately, he had not been doing so, and there was no way to tell how long the key had been missing. Like he had told me when he wrote me up, this was important since those keys were assigned to him and he had been informed of the policy and his responsibilities when he accepted the keys. Since he was the boss's golden boy, they didn't fire him like we were all warned would happen. Doug did end up getting a substantial fine, and while I don't know the exact amount, I do know he was incredibly upset about it. The year was almost over and Doug got moved to another building the next year, so I never had much more to do with him. I do know that he ended up losing his job due to some incident involving another female RA. Well, that was longer than I expected. Hopefully it's worth a laugh for anyone who actually read it, and at least I have it wrote down now. While in college as an RA, I have a creep for a boss. He writes me up for not finding students who are irresponsible with their keys and get locked out of their rooms. My coworker loses a building master key and is going to lose her job, housing, and be fined $12,000. We discovered that our boss had accidentally assigned his key to my friend and was in possession of the key assigned to her. Since he was irresponsible with assigning the keys, we are able to recover her key from him and he got held accountable.